Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. This is Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest. I'm joined by Duane Bailey. Now, this gentleman has been at Mason, like how long?
Just over 2 years.
Over 2 years. And I was going to say that, and I did that as an opener because in my mind, when we met, I felt like you was here longer than 2 years.
In a good way.
In a good way. And I'll share, we'll talk about why I felt that later on in the show. But before we get started, can you just give us a little background on who you are and how you get here to Mason?
Sure, I'd love to. So I went to Fairfield University, earned my undergraduate degree in marketing, and while I was there, I had a work-study job working in the Office of Public Relations. So I suppose in a way that was my first entree into this world of higher education, specifically in marketing and communications. 10 years after graduating from Fairfield with my bachelor's degree, I earned an MBA in international business from the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C.
And so with that being said, you were doing international business and traveling. What carteled into that?
Yeah, so what a great question. So I took an interesting career journey. So when I was an undergraduate, I had a professor at Fairfield who said, if you're going to be in marketing, you have to have a position in sales. You have to carry a bag. And I started my professional career in retail, working for a company called Abraham & Straus, which is no longer in business, but a lot like Macy's. And then did that for a year, and then had a fairly long career with AT&T, which spun off and became Lucent Technologies, which in turn spun off and became Avaya. And most of my positions there were sales positions. And then I decided, kind of a midlife crisis, if you will, I wanted to go back and have a career in marketing. So I started over, went to work for WGL, an energy company, and became director of marketing over the course of a couple of years. Went to interstate moving and relocation before coming to George Mason.
So with that being said, working in marketing, I think that it's very creative. What aspect of marketing did you really enjoy? Was it the engagement with a customer? Was it the opportunity, to create images? What aspect of marketing you vibed with?
Yeah, so there are two aspects of marketing that really vibe with me. So the first one is this focus on outcomes. I'm very focused on outcomes. Always have been. So even when I was in sales, of course, you're focused on making your revenue target, right? But here in marketing, it's really about building a brand, growing a reputation, positioning your brand in the market. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect is the people. And it's interesting because in my career, I've met a lot of people who are in marketing who, believe it or not, classify themselves as introverts. Mm-hmm. I'm much more of an extrovert. I enjoy meeting new people. And for me, that's really been the greatest thing about marketing. And the reason that's so important as a marketer, in order to understand and be successful in terms of marketing a product, you have to understand your audience, your target audience. And there's no better way to do that than to physically, meet with them, right, and build those relationships.
And so it's funny, this is a great tail end to why we had this podcast, because we're both members of the illustrious Sip Sip Club here at Mason with our coffee, and we love that. And we were, over a cup of coffee, we were talking about building relationships, and we were just having a dialogue about what is going on with the world today in digital and like how important relationship building in person is. And so just, I don't know, what are your thoughts right now? And I was thinking about the state of the world and not the state of the world in regards to politics, but we're just talking about connecting with people. What do you think, man? As a marketing person expert, what do you think is going on?
Yeah, so let me just talk a little bit about the difference between what I think the difference is between in-person networking and virtual networking, right? So for me, in-person networking, the real value of that is it helps you build stronger relationships. And I will say at the outset that, sure, totally agree that in-person networking is more of an investment of time and money, right? If you think about that, like I have to travel, I can only get so many contacts in per day, as opposed to virtual networking. Virtual networking to me is more transactional, right? But the upside of it is I can reach far more people much more quickly across a wider area at substantially lower cost, both in terms of time and money. The downside to me of virtual networking, and I think we've all been there, if you're on a telephone call, you're on a Zoom call, you're on a Teams call, you're only hearing and seeing what the other person wants to show you, right? And you're doing the same thing. And I think there's also this notion of presence, right? So when you're networking virtually, and I'm guilty of this too. So years ago when we were on conference calls, I was a famous multitasker. I'd have one ear on the phone, a speakerphone actually, so I can have two hands on the keyboard. But I would be multitasking.
Two screens. I'm full tilt.
Right.
I'm two screens, another window open, checking email, like.
Right.
That, yeah.
Whereas you're in person, like you and I are sitting here across the table from each other. We're fully present in the moment, right? We're making eye contact. We're paying attention to each other. We are fully present, and that's the value. That's the advantage of in-person networking.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is like I know it's an abstract concept of social capital, and you're thinking about the investments in your relationships as social capital, and the way that you compare digital to in-person was like financial capital, like shortcuts. You can make get rich, like faster,
right?
But then also but this investment it takes more, is longer. So I'm thinking like okay. Buying a house, it's a really more in detailed investment, and it will yield a lot, but it's way more work as opposed to some other way to make quicker money. And so I'm thinking that like in my mind, I'm like, okay, when I balance the opportunities to meet people, I'm thinking, okay, this one might take more labor in person, but it's going to yield a lot like a house,
right?
As opposed to pray and spray digitally, which will give me some quick relationships, but may not be as fruitful long term. Couldn't
agree more. And the point I would add to that is, I don't think anyone can make a case for one over the other.
No.
I would make the case that you need both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the people who are really successful at this know how to leverage both, the power of both. And the example that I'm going to give you, and I've done this at George Mason University. I've been here for just over 2 years, and what I will tell you is what I typically do is I will start my relationship virtually. That could be a phone call, that could be an email, that could be a Teams or a Zoom call. And then I'll follow up that initial contact with an intentional walk over to their office, right? And I actually have one for you.
Yeah.
So I will leave a small personal gift. Typically it's a Costello branded item like a coffee cup. I'll fill it with candy. I'll put my business card in there. And occasionally I write a note in the back. Hey, great meeting you. Looking forward to working with you. And invariably, that leads into yet another virtual interaction, which is the email or the Teams message or the phone call that said, hey, Duane, sorry I missed you. I saw you stop by my office. Thank you so much for that small gift. How did you know that Ghirardelli candies are my favorite, right? And the other...
Are you going to say, like, are you going to act like you knew, but you're just using Ghirardelli candies? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
I knew it was your favorite. You just threw some candies in there.
Right? Of course.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think the other advantage is, when you start looking at Costello branded merchandise, our dean likes to say I'm everywhere. And in many senses, I am everywhere. But what I'm also leaving in my path is an opportunity to brand the school or the college, right? So if you go anywhere on campus now where I've been, chances are you're going to see people that have a Costello coffee cup on their desk. You're going to see people walking around with a Costello tumbler. You're going to see people with Costello pennants on their bulletin board. And some of that is by design, right? Because I'm trying to build this brand. So for me, in-person networking, virtual networking, it all is part of marketing, and it's how I'm working to build the brand internally here at George Mason University.
And now I think that's where I'm going to tell him where I thought you worked here longer than 2 years is because when I'm in the same spaces as you, people are so familiarized with you that I felt like just, when you have a conversation in a circle or something, I'm seeing how you interact. I'm like, he's so connected with people that I thought you worked here longer than 2 years. You get what I'm saying? So that presence of, being in person and then just not saying taking up spaces in a bad way, taking up spaces in a good way, shows that like almost like you are everywhere. But you could be like, I'm only here like 2 years, but people don't know that because of that everywhere feeling.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the thought I had that came from that too was the importance of getting out. And I think that all the time I hear words, especially in big spaces like Mason, is that we're siloed. And I think we self-silo because I challenge people to say, like, how often have you just randomly gone to another building that you never went to, right? Most people, even in this, they go in their comfort zone. They go to work, go straight to the same office, and go back. And I was like, they could have worked here 5 years and never stepped foot in enterprise. They just went to sub one all the time.
Right.
And so I think that getting out is a great technique to break silos.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that you raise. And I remember some years ago, there was an expression, management by walking around, right? And that was a popular concept at the time. And that's really what this is, right? So it's you're managing a business, and you're recognizing, or at least I recognize, that the only way to do that is to walk around, right? I walk around the building that we're in. I walk around Enterprise Hall on a daily basis. I find things that need to be fixed or corrected. I'll put a work order in. I might just do it myself. If there's a piece of trash on the floor, I'll pick it up because I take pride in the building that I work in. But more importantly, I want to walk around and I want to know how others are experiencing the Costello College of Business. I want to know how they're experiencing our building. I walk around the campus. I look for opportunities where we have signage maybe hanging in the Johnson Center to make sure the signage is right. I spend a lot of time in Merton Hall, so I work very closely with my counterparts over at the Office of University Branding and have built some very strong relationships with them, almost to the point now where it's almost like we're all part of the same team. And we all have that sense of cooperation and togetherness. So there are no silos between the Costello College of Business and the Office of University Branding, as an example.
But that's intentional. And I think that I do that too. Just, I could easily get a cup of coffee in my building, but because I got the Sip Club, joking, I make myself go to the Starbucks to get out of my office, and then you never know, as I walk through the Johnson Center, I see spontaneous conversations. And so and then sometimes people feel guilty, like you said, they're like, oh no, I forgot to send you that email, right?
Right.
Because I've always thought about this too. Like one time I was like, I was talking to a student one day, and the student was like, I sent them an email, and I was like, okay, that's it? I was like, did you do any more outreach? And they're like, no. I was like, did you pick up the phone? No. Did you walk over there? No. And I think it was like this fear of like getting away from digital. I'm like, just walk up on them, roll up on them, And I do that all the time. Like, if it's really, really important, I'll go to their office and just say, I have a quick, hi, I'm Philip Wilkerson. Who are you? Philip Wilkerson. Who do you here to see? Person I'm seeing. That's when I talk, are they in real quick? Can I just pop my head in?
Right. We are so alike. So I have a story very similar to that. So a couple years ago, my first spring semester here, we were trying to get another department to work with us. And I went to my social media lead and said, hey, do me a favor. I need you to reach out to this department. I need you to schedule something. It's January. Schedule it for April. And she did. She sent an email. And I went down a couple weeks later and said, did you hear back? No. I sent an email. I never heard back. I'm like, oh, okay. She goes, I'll send another email. So, another couple weeks go by. I went down like, have you heard back? No, haven't heard back. I sent a second email. I'm like, have you picked up the phone and called? Oh, no. So this went on for another month, right? And then finally I said one day, it was March, mid-March, and I said, I want you to come with me. I'm going to show you how the magic's done, right? So we brought 3 Costello mugs. We filled them with candy. We put my business card in there.
I'm going to call you Willy Wonka from now on.
We walked over, we walked in, and I saw the person at the front desk, and I said, hey, is so-and-so here? And they said, no, she's not here. I said, well, I actually have something I want to leave. So I have one for you, the person at the desk. I have one for your intern, and I have one for the person I'm trying to meet. And you know what? I got an email a few minutes later, within an hour probably, that said, Of course, you can have what you need. Happy to help. So, sorry I missed you, right?
Well, I was about to say, did they say something like sorry? They always like, oh,
Right,
sorry
right.
to miss you.
Yeah. And you know what? That was the beginning of a relationship that actually bore fruit in terms of other opportunities. We did some student experience opportunities with that department last semester, and all of that was based on building that initial relationship. And interestingly enough, one of the follow-ons to that was an email that I got this past fall that said, hey, you want to meet for coffee? Sure. And then out of that came some ideas for us to collaborate.
And I love that. I love that story because it's very concrete. And, I'm not saying I'm an avid reader. I'm an avid audiobook listener. So, when people say you don't really read, I'm like, I'm getting the content. And one book I'm actually listening to right now is the Dale Carnegie, How to Make Friends and Influence Others.
Right.
Which I think as I walked up here, I was like, this, it's from the 1920s, 1920s, I believe, when he did it. And I think they could be updated like the DSM, right? Like they just need to modernize it a little bit.
Right.
But on the inverse, some of that stuff is very timeless. Like
right.
That still makes sense. They just need to add like a virtual component, like, meet someone, then, call them an email, but do all the same techniques like watch your tone and it's like, start with honey rather than, I can't remember the other one. Like, don't like come at people aggressive, get to know people, listen. All these things are really good. It just needs to be modernized.
Right.
Maybe we should write a book. Maybe
yeah.
We should write that.
So that's another great point, right? So I like to think of virtual networking as something that really isn't new, right? Yeah. What is new is the technology.
Yeah.
So back in the 80s when I was starting to sell, my first sales job was telemarketing.
Oh God.
And right? And that's like virtual sales, right? Because you're not fully present. You're on the phone. The only thing that you're getting from that other person is tone of voice and what they're saying. You're not seeing body language. You're not seeing facial expressions.
That's so tough.
You have no idea what their office looks like, what their interests are. So how do you strike up a conversation, right? Really, really hard. Fast forward to the pandemic and the explosion of Zoom and Teams calls. So that added another component, right? For people like me who are used to just doing things on the phone, oh my gosh, I can't multitask anymore. Or if I do it, I have to be smarter about it. I have to, kind of hide what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And that's why, you'll see people use branded backgrounds. They have their Zoom backgrounds. They might blur their background. You might still see some people that don't do anything. They just have their office in the background. But I think fair amount of, if you're on enough external calls, especially with larger companies, you're seeing a fair amount of branded backgrounds, right? So the point of that is, it's just telemarketing on steroids. Yeah, if you think about it, right?
Right. Okay.
And I think the other thing too, with we talked. You asked before about the digital age and the difference between in person and virtual. One of the things I always laugh at when I see it is I have people tell me like, well, Duane, I can do this job 100% remote, right? And I'm like, if you think about the people that you're marketing to, your customers, if you will, they're the students, right? And the only way you're really going to understand them is if you're here, you're engaging with them, you're spending time with them. And so they're like, okay, fine, and I'm like, hey, hybrid is the way to go. Like, I'm never going to say to someone like, you can't work virtual, because I think there's tremendous value in that. And I think that is a very important thing to a lot of us. But I also think too, you don't have to be here 100% of the time, but I think you have to have that balance between being here sometime and not being here. And what's really funny is when people come that think, oh, I can do my job remote 100% of the time. They'll spend 3 days in the office. They'll spend 2 days in the office. And to your earlier point, they'll never walk around. They'll never leave the office. Yeah. So I think when that happens, people are missing out on that value of engagement. And one of the things I tried to do this past semester, was to engage more with the students. I spent my first 2 years here engaging with faculty and staff, and to some extent the business community. But what an eye-opener this past semester, engaging with students, right? And now I'm starting to understand. I was a first-generation college student, first-generation college grad, and I get first generation. And at George Mason, first generation is a big part of who our students are. Yeah. So I think understanding that, engaging with them, understanding what's important to them, what their concerns are, what their needs are, that's helping me to be a better marketer. That's helping me to design programs here at the Costello College of Business, right? Because I understand them. And I wouldn't have that appreciation as much if I didn't engage with them as directly as I have.
Yeah, and I think about that too. I always tell new employees, while I was in the grind of the semester, right? Like, do your job, but then in the low points, I made it a strategy. It's called outreach summers. So, like, for instance, I'm doing my career fairs and working with employers, but then over every summer, I always say, I like a list of all the different people in different departments, and I say something like, now that we can breathe a little bit,
right.
Let's re-engage. Or if there's anyone I need to reintroduce myself to, or can I come to one of your staff meetings and introduce myself, whether hybrid or in person, because I realize I need to build that over the summer. That's my summer investment, is those relationships over the summer.
Right.
And then once it's the grind, I have to do my job. But while everyone has downtime, I feel like that's a tangible project. And so I remember I just used a simple Excel spreadsheet and had only maybe 20 contacts. Now that Excel spreadsheet got 150, categorized by what department they work at. And I can always say, I got a person for that.
Right.
Right? People call me the unofficial mayor of Mason.
Right.
Self-appointed. people as in Philip Wilkerson calls himself the unofficial mayor of Mason. But I joke to say that people start asking me questions about George Mason externally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work in financial aid, but I know the contact person.
Right.
Someone yesterday asked me, does Eagle Bank Arena, donate free tickets to Christian concerts? I don't work at Eagle Bank, but guess what? I know the manager of Eagle Bank because his daughter and my son went to daycare together.
Oh, yeah.
And I just talked to him while we were picking up our kids.
Right.
Added him to the list, right?
Right.
And so I'm able to point guard. It doesn't mean I know everything. People is a really great resource.
Right.
If you know who to ask. But the only way I would know who to ask is I had to get out and go pick up my kid from daycare.
Right.
I had to come talk to you. Some alum comes to me and says, I want to do some engagement and I'll need to talk to business students. I'm like, all right, I got a person I could just forward an email to.
Right.
And these are things where I'm not the gatekeeper. I'm a point guard.
Right, and I think that decision, that is such a great investment, right, of your time, because those relationships bear fruit, right? And what is really amazing to me, and this goes back to very early in my career, one of my detour jobs, my side jobs, was I managed a customer care center for AT&T. And one of my jobs was to collect money, overdue receivables.
And that's hard because,
gosh.
People might cuss you out and all that
right.
stuff. Right. And hang up
and I remember there was a really large account. It was a bank. And they were seriously past due. And I remember sending emails to the contact. The guy would never return my calls, never return my email.
Because he don't want to pay.
Didn't want to pay.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of a really funny story, but the national account manager, the salesperson on the account said, Duane, the reason he's not returning your call, he doesn't know you. And I'm sitting here thinking, really? So he said, I suggest you take him to lunch. I'm like, so you're telling me to take this guy who's not paying his bills to lunch? He's like, Duane, I'm just telling you, I know it doesn't make sense. Trust me, take the guy to lunch. I took the guy to lunch, right? And the first thing he said to me is, I'm so glad we got this opportunity to meet. Now I know you, right? And guess what? He started returning my emails, started returning my calls, and he started paying his bills. And I think that's a great example of the power of relationships, the power of that investment, right? So it was very important to invest in that relationship. And I found that to be true here too, right? So we're all busy, right? I get a million emails a day, I'm sure you do, and it's very difficult sometimes to be able to answer them as quickly as you may want to. But I will tell you that when you get an email from somebody that you know and you have a really good relationship with, sometimes you click on those first, sometimes you deal with those first, right? Yeah. Things get done. And I've been super fortunate here at George Mason, just through the strength of those relationships, the things I've been able to get done. Has really made a difference for me.
I actually thought about that, psychologically. It's like when you get an email and you look, and you start to associate, even if it's a really close friend, right? You're like, oh, I got to prioritize that, and it could be the more easier thing. Maybe the more laborious task, but just because it's that person, you're like, I gotta get that done for my friend,
right?
And so it's like, what they say, put a face on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great, thinking if I get an inbox, right? And you're like, oh, And so I think that's like continuous engagement. I'm going to use that example to say, like, if people know you and they receive communication from you, they're going to try to prioritize it. Or they might hit you up and say, "I'm so sorry." You know, it's almost like they have an innate guilt. You know, like
right.
think about like if you ghost one of your friends for a long time, you feel guilty, right?
Right.
You're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." You know, like I know I was supposed to get back to you, and that's that feeling at work, right? Like you'd be like, "I don't know that." Like if I don't know someone, you don't feel guilty. You're like, "Man, they'll figure it out. They all right, right?" Yeah. But if it's someone you know, you're like, "Oh, I'm letting my friend down." You know, things like that. And I think that's a good technique. Like you build. People want to help you because they'll know you.
And I think that's something I learned in sales, right? So there's that old axiom, people do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
Right? So it's building that relationship, getting people to know you, getting people to like you, getting people to trust you. Yeah. And then when it comes time to make the sale, it's a whole lot easier. And, one of the things you and I were talking before the podcast began, I sold to Marriott for a number of years, and that is very much a people-centered business. And I was embedded in that account, and I remember I had to interview with a client before I could get that job. Not with my company. My company wanted me to have that job, but they sent me over to Marriott's headquarters. They said, "You have to meet the client. The client has to interview you. The client has to say it's okay for you to be their account lead."
Was it like a mock interview, like a test?
No, it was just a conversation, right?
Okay,
and part of that conversation was, Duane, like, we know your paycheck is blue, we know it comes from AT&T, but when you work for us, you have to be our advocate. And at the time, their expression was, "Make it happen," right? So I became very embedded in that account to the point where I had a desk at Marriott Corporate. I had an ID, so I didn't have to sign in. And you know what I found? I found that by being there, I not only got more business, they would actually throw business over the side of the cube and say, "Hey, Duane, there's a property in Florida that needs a voicemail. Can you help me with that? There's a property in Toronto that needs some phones. Can you help me with that?" Sure, right? But more importantly, we built that relationship. Yeah. And there were times when I would say to my team, like, we need to make sure that we're engaging the customer on a regular basis. You need to take the customer to lunch. And what I would always say to them is, if you're not taking your customer to lunch, your competitor is, right? So
it's almost like dating, man. If you don't treat your girl right,
right. So there's a lot of crossover, right, between personal and business.
Yeah.
And you start to build those types of relationships. And to your earlier point, when you don't want to let your friends down, you don't want to let those relationships down. So we had this really good relationship, and I think sometimes nobody likes to say no, right? So in sales, when a customer's not going to buy, what tends to happen is people ghost you. And, they're involved with you on a regular basis, good communication going back and forth. Comes time to make a decision and nothing, radio silence. Same thing in our relationships, right? So I think that's why it's always important to have those good relationships, have the stronger relationships, so that at least, people feel comfortable being honest, right? And I would always tell people, a no's okay. Better than nothing, right? And I had a philosophy teacher in college that said, you cannot not decide, because not to decide is to make a decision not to decide, right? So in sales and so many things here, when people say, well, I really can't decide, I'm not going to make a decision. Well, you are making a decision, right?
You're making a decision not to make a decision.
Right. Okay. And part of going back to the relationship aspect of that is creating a safe zone where it's safe for people to be honest and say, "Hey, Duane, look, I really like the solution, or I really like what you're asking me to do. I'd really like to help you, but to be honest with you, here's why I can't help you.
It's too expensive,
right.
too this and that."
Right.
And then you can say, well, at least by saying it's too expensive, maybe I can find a way to get it, lower.
Right.
So you like give me, even if it's the negative feedback, like this guy doesn't like this aspect of the idea.
Right.
At least I can use that to come back with something different or a lower cost, rather than just ghost me. Right. I'd rather take a no because of, and I can use that because of, rather than just a straight up no, or no communication at all.
So that's where marketing comes in, right? So it's that loop of continuous feedback, right? So it's always engaging with people, always understanding them, always knowing what they're looking for. Because I think when I talked about outcomes early on, when you start looking at what people are looking for, it's always helpful to understand, to start from a place of what is the outcome that they desire, and how can I help them get there?
So I got a 2-part question. This question is, who is someone that has mentored you in this in-person, in-person networking, building relationships? Like someone's like, man, that was the person that like took me around and showed me how to get it done. And then I'll sell the second part because I want to say like, I got it later, but I want to hear that first part.
Okay, so that's a tough question because I think honestly I've had so many mentors over the course of my career.
Yeah.
But at the risk of sounding, I don't want to sound like a brown noser, but I'm going to say our dean, right? So I remember when I was interviewing here at George Mason University, the interview process went very well, and I kind of had this inkling that I think this is going really well. I think they're probably going to make me an offer. And then Patrick Soleimani, who is the person I report to, said, "Oh, we want you to meet the dean." And I remember thinking, wow, I've never been in a dean's office before. And I had 10 minutes with Dean Vinze. And when I went into his office, the first thing I said was, I kind of an icebreaker, I cracked a joke and said, I've never been in a dean's office before, and I always thought when I was in college, the only time you came here is when you were in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? He started laughing, and I said, I probably shouldn't have said that. And he said, no, it's totally fine. So one of the things he told me was, you have to understand in higher education that things take longer here than they do in the corporate world. And I looked at your resume, and you have lots of experience in the corporate world that I absolutely think will apply here. But the one thing I'm going to tell you is you have to get used to being more patient. Things take longer here, but we're always better off for that. And I thought, that is like the best advice anyone's ever given me, because I think had he not told me that, I would have walked in here on fire.
Guns a-blazing. Yeah.
Right? In a hurry, not really wanting to hear what other people think.
This is too slow. Yeah,
right?
It's a different vibe, for
so
sure.
kind of what that did was that kind of set the stage for me. And it made me realize that, hey, the last thing I want to do is I want to come in here and position myself as a know-it-all. So I came in here, very deferential. Hey, I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm really glad to meet you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy to be here. I love that. That's my line when people say, "What are you doing?" I'm just happy to be here.
Right,
I love that.
right.
Yeah.
And I'm here to learn. And that's where the value of networking and this intentionality of, me walking to your office and leaving a cup filled with candy in my business card, right? Building that relationship, getting people comfortable that, Duane's really a great guy. He's super easy to work with. He listens. He doesn't have this approach where he's coming here as a know-it-all. And that really, I think, has made all the difference for me, just that one piece of advice. So that's been my latest mentor here.
Now, inversely, who is a young person that is like, is getting it right? Like, and we have an example. I'm throwing a softball, but like, you're just like, wow, this is, someone that's actually getting it, that is beyond this new digital age. They kind of understand the power of in-person connection.
Yeah, so I hope he doesn't mind, but I'm going to call out.
No, he does. He doesn't. No, he doesn't not mind. This dude loves it. I'm gonna send it to him. I know. Yeah, I know him. I text him all the time.
I have a couple. Okay. So
I think let's see. Let's say 1, 2, 3 who were saying at the same time and see if we're the same person for the first one.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Cody.
Rockable. Oh my gosh.
And Rockable. Okay. Both of them.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about both, right?
Okay, so yeah. Like, these are two phenomenal students.
Right. So let me start with Cody. Cody Salenga. So Cody's interesting because he and I first met my first couple of weeks on the job. We met over at Dolce Vita, a restaurant in Fairfax.
Off campus.
This is hilarious, right?
Yeah.
And it was at a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship retail pop-up. And right? And I'm like, hey, great to meet you. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Sure. So we did. And this past spring, right, he saw me in an elevator at Merton Hall, places, right? I told you I go to Merton, and said to me, "Hey, Duane, do you remember me? I'm Cody Salenga." and I'm like, not really, but I didn't want to tell him that. So I'm like, sure. She's like, "I'd like you to be my mentor." I'm like, I'd love to, right? So we established an informal mentoring relationship, and had some great conversations. So when I talk about student engagement, that's an example where I learned as much from that relationship as he got from me. In fact, I would probably argue, he would say the opposite, but I would say I got more out of it than he did. But one of the things I really liked about Cody Like you'd give him a suggestion, he and I go back and forth. We talk about how to make it happen. And oh my gosh, like he took one of the suggestions that we talked about, one of the ideas, and he actually had a concert for the company that he's interning for, and the Johnson Center, right before Halloween.
Yes,
and
I was like,
oh my gosh,
I was like, who is this kid?
Right?
Yeah.
And
it's phenomenal.
I worked late that night because I thought it was important for me to show up as his mentor. And he said, Duane, I can't tell you how much it means to me to have you here. And I took some pictures. We put it on Instagram. We put it on social. Great following. But that's a guy who gets it, right? Yeah. He was able to turn that opportunity, that idea, into an opportunity, right? And I know he just graduated. He's going to be fine.
Yeah.
The other one I want to talk about is Rockable alum. So Rockable came to me last year in the spring. He's another guy, right? So he comes to me and he's like, Duane, I did this video. I put it on Instagram. I got like 5,000 views. And it's what it means to be a business major. And to be honest with you, it was hilarious. And I kind of thought some people in the academic world may not like it because it was kind of making fun of being a business major. But as a business major, as an undergrad business major, I totally got it. Yeah. Things like, I'm a business major, so of course I have an internship. I'm a business major. Of course I have no homework. I'm a business major. Of course, my STEM is finance and accounting, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, this is hilarious. So he said, but I have a business proposition, so I'd like to work for you. I'd like to work.
I'd like to work for you.
Can you?
Off the break, these kids, I mean, I'm telling you.
Right?
I'm glad you said his name too, because he's phenomenal too. I remember meeting him. No, he came to the career fair and was like, yo, can I make content for your career fair? I was like, all right. He's like, I'll take videos. And he just took, he was like, he just did it.
Right,
and I was like, and it's like, I was like, sure. He's like, first, someone put him to me, like, because I'm not the marketing lead, but they're like, Phil does a lot of social media with our office, ask him.
Yeah.
And he did it. And I was like, all right. I had a recorder, like a lapel mic. I was like, here you go, just take that. I gave him my lapel mic, and I was like, go ahead and do your thing.
Right.
And he did it himself.
Right.
Phenomenal.
So the thing I'm going to tell you is, and with Rockable as well, we are a much better place as the Costello College of Business because of Rockable's contributions to our Instagram, to all the things that we're doing. So when you start looking around Enterprise Hall, we now have pictures of students, right? So I've gone to Cody, I've gone to Rockable, I'm like, hey, Office of University Branding wants to do a photo shoot in the bookstore. Do you have friends? I need students, right? And
yes.
The students that the two of them came up with and gave to me that I could give to OUB, the feedback I got from OUB was, Duane, those students were fantastic. They were the best, right? Do you have any more? So they are high energy. They represent us well. It's really been a pleasure to work with them. And I have really, when I talk about student engagement, I'm really talking about Rockable. I'm talking about Cody. I'm talking about the friends that they've brought to these engagements. And I am meeting with them. I am learning more and more from them about the things that they're looking for in a business school. I'm learning from them in terms of how they're going after career opportunities. You and I talked before the podcast, like about student expectations. So when they graduate, what's a reasonable expectation for a career, for a starting salary, for a job? And sure, they're asking for advice, but I'm learning as much from them in terms of what's important to them. And the things that, if I do give them advice, they're telling me like, well, Duane, that worked really well, or Duane, that didn't work so well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's yet another tangible example of why it's important to invest in relationships.
Yeah, and at that point, and I think, we had our funny story. It was shot. Cody and Rockable, we said different names, but I think you're both amazing students, and there's more than that. And the thing I'm also saying is more students similar to them in other departments. These student leaders and the best student leaders on campus are not the ones that just sit back on their Instagram. They're getting out there on campus,
right.
and they're confident enough to engage beyond students. And those are the ones that I really think of, like, that I had that same confidence when I was their age. I didn't, honestly.
Right.
I was involved in student leadership a little bit at James Madison, and I had a few adult mentors, right, on campus, but I still wasn't going to rooms like these young men were. I didn't go to career fairs. I didn't go to things like that. And so I want to say to young people, like, don't lower your confidence. Like, they did it, but they're not the exception. Everyone has the ability to do the in-person stuff. It's about, like, they didn't come at me with a sales pitch or anything. They were just normal, hi, I'm introducing themselves.
Right.
Striking up conversations. And these are things I think everyone has the ability to do. I mean, when I say that, like, they're phenomenal, but it's also like, don't put it on a pedestal. Like, I'm encouraging all students to get out and walk to an adult, quote unquote, we're all adults, but walk to a person and introduce yourself. Like, what do you do here? I'll say this right now. I'm 40 years old, and I still embarrass myself in front of people, and I live. Like, I'll give you a concrete example. And I was at President Washington's address to University Life. I sit in the back, and I sit next to a gentleman. I said, hey, my name is Philip. What's your name? He's like, my name is James Anthony, I think that's it. And he was like, I was like, oh, great. What do you do here? He was like, I'm the provost. I was like, all right, excellent. Like Philip Wilkerson. Like, I was like, hey, yo, I was like, I probably should have known that. But there was no problem. I made a joke. I was like, well, now I'll remember your name and all this stuff. But like, I lived. The point is, I lived. I made a joke out of it. I learned more about him and where he went to college in California, things like that. I still had a conversation. I didn't like lean out of it. I leaned into it.
Right.
Leaned into that embarrassment, and I think that a lot of people have, I say like social anxiety. They think that they're always making mistakes in in-person connection, and so it's easier to use. I think a lot of people use the digital as a shield.
Right.
A shield from awkwardness and embarrassment and all that. And I'm like, life is embarrassing and awkward, but it's okay. Like, you'll live. You'll live.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. So I think, my message to younger people like me, right? So when I was in college, first generation college student, I probably an extrovert, but leaning toward being an introvert. Not as confident, not in a hurry to engage. People that worked at the university, my gosh, I would never go to the dean's office. Yeah. I would never reach out to the guy that did marketing or the woman that did marketing communications. Would never do that.
Never.
But what is interesting was I got pushed out of my comfort zone, right? Because I took that sales job with AT&T. And I remember like calling, my first set of accounts were retail people in Manhattan, in New York City.
Oh,
right? And you know what? Gave new meaning to the expression New York Minute.
Yeah.
Right? You had to get everything done in a New York Minute. But it brought me out of my comfort zone. And then I took a face-to-face selling job, and I interfaced with people at Marriott. And I wasn't just interfacing with front office managers. I was interfacing with general managers, with Mr. Marriott, right? And people would say to me, well, what do you have for me? And, you couldn't go in as a salesperson and just talk about, well, I got this cup and it's white and it's got a nice logo on it. They wanted to know, like, how are you going to help me improve my business? Yeah. Right? And I'm like, wow, like, I'm going to have this conversation with Mr. Marriott and I have to have something really intelligent. So what I learned, a couple things. One, preparation, right? Preparation is the key to confidence.
Yeah.
If you are well prepared, that helps you to be confident in you. It helps you to be confident in what you're saying. It helps you to be confident in knowing that you're bringing value to others. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to tell folks is that you have to have the right attitude, right? And I remember when I'm a little bit older than you, so my kids who are now in their 30s, right, and adulting, I remember when they were playing junior high basketball.
Okay.
And there was a poster on the wall at one of the school gyms that said, "Attitudes are contagious. Is yours worth catching?" Oh. Right? So,
I mean, probably as a marketing person, that probably wouldn't have been the best at COVID. They're like, take that sign down.
Way before COVID.
Take that sign down.
Yeah. So what I'll tell you is like the takeaway for that is, if you have a positive attitude, right, about meeting new people, and a mindset that says, I enjoy meeting new people, I enjoy sharing information, I enjoy learning new things, you are going to be successful in building relationships, right? So it's having the right attitude, it's preparing, and this is funny. Back when I first started working, we didn't have the internet, right? And I'm really dating myself. So it was a lot harder to research people, to understand who people were.
Yes, I will ask
right?
that. How'd you
So,
do that?
so one of the things I did was in face-to-face selling. The very first thing I did was I would kind of scope out, look around their workspace,
That's it.
right,
Sherlock
and
Holmes.
find things that shared indications of shared interests in
Yes.
hobbies, in
Yes.
affiliations, right?
Yes.
And the example I'm going to give you, and Philip's going to like this. So I would say something like, "Oh, I see you went to George Mason University.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, I'm taking classes there now too. What was your major? And what was your favorite class?
Yeah.
Right? And just being quiet and listening to the answer and using that as a jumping off point. And if he said, "Oh, I was a business major, I studied marketing. My favorite class was brand management." Oh my gosh, my favorite class too. And then that's the basis for us to start that conversation even before I bring up business, right? The other thing I want to tell folks is, networking. Networking is one of those things that we all have to do. And we talk about career fairs, and we have opportunities for students to network in person on campus. Oh my gosh, I hated networking, right, when I was younger. And I thought, what do I have to offer? Like, what can I possibly say? I'm going to meet this guy, Philip Wilkerson, right? How am I going to introduce myself? So what I would do is, before the internet, I would read USA Today. And why USA Today was such a great choice was because the articles weren't in-depth at all. You could spend a couple of minutes learning about a lot of different things. So you could, in essence, become fluent in a lot of different topics that are current.
Like Jeopardy, just kind of
Right.
know a little bit of trivia, like, oh, Spain,
Right.
Madrid is a great place. Like,
Right.
know a little bit about the world. Know a little bit about the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a technique I adopted later on is, the internet became a thing, and LinkedIn became a thing. I would look people up on LinkedIn that I thought were going to be at the conference, because I would have a list of people that I would want to make sure I met.
Yep.
But I would also look up like, hey, where is this event being held? What city? So look up the city, find something interesting about the city. I would look up current events. So if I were in New Orleans at a networking event the week before the Super Bowl, and I bumped into Philip Wilkerson, I would say, "Hey, Philip, who do you like for the Super Bowl?" Right. And you know what? He would have an opinion. He would probably tell me. And that would be a jumping off point. So using questions like that as icebreakers, really, really helpful. So I guess it goes back to, I'm going to say the way I summarize my answer or my thought on this particular topic. 3 things you can do, right, to overcome that fear, that social anxiety. Have the right attitude, be intentional, and prepare.
Yeah. Well, I'll just add to one technique that you shared, because I do it all the time, is basically, I call it be the Sherlock Holmes, hyper-vigilant. And if you watch the one with Robert Downey Jr., he does the little thing where he zooms in, he's like, that perfume, he must have been from Spain, and then his shoes, they got mud on it and like that. Yeah. And so I do that, like, I hyper-focus. I don't know if it's my ADHD superpower, but like, I came in your room and I saw that over there and I was like, oh, is that a vision board? I do vision boards. Or like, you scan things like you just said. And so I joke, but my wife she will attest to this. If I see anything, someone's wearing a hoodie, I say, whatever, go Mason. And I say, do you go to Mason? And in a supermarket or anything, I'm in a historically black fraternity, and I'm always scanning. If I see something like a lanyard, 06 good brother, and then we say, oh, what chapter you cross? And so I would tell the people, students, 2 things inversely. Scan your surroundings, right? Like scan, look for clues around you to start conversations, but also brand yourself. Wear a little pen,
right.
Wear a shirt, like almost have little like calling signals to your people. It's like, I'm gonna call it calling signals to your people, because like you can go to a conference, you see that Mason pen, oh, shaking hands, business, you go to Mason. So I always very intentionally wear pens or gear or socks or accessories that I know can spark conversations. And so I think for those young people out there, wear swag, wear stuff that people will be attracted to. Your people will be attracted to you because it's like a magnet for your people, but then also be on the lookout for your people, leveraging that.
Right, and I think that's one of the easiest ways to build relationships through that shared connection.
Yeah.
Right, and it makes it so easy to have a conversation, to ask a question, to listen.
And the thing is, too, you may have an agenda, but I love what you said. I use the branding. I use that ask everything other than what I wanted to ask, then go into it. So
Right.
like, oh, you went to school here. What's this? Your major, your this. And then the main thing is listen and try your best to remember it.
Right.
So I'm gonna say I remember that you work for AT&T, like in my mind.
Right.
Right. I remember I'm gonna call you Willy Wonka. Like, no, seriously. Like, I have nicknames for people, in my head. Like that's my man, Willy Wonka. And I remember that that's but the Willy Wonka thing is not just gonna be like Willy Wonka, the funny movie. It's gonna remind me fully about your technique of. Hello, Positive Philter listeners. It's Philip Wilkerson. Just wanted to apologize for the technical difficulties. We'll be right back in a moment, but thank you for listening and hope you enjoy this episode so far. Hello, Positive Philter listeners. We're back. I apologize. I think that we had technical difficulties. We had a great conversation. So wherever we left off, it was probably amazing. And so let's land this plane. We had a great episode. Duane, we're going to go to my last segment of my show. It's called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get vice versa. You ask me a random question, I ask you a random question. You want to go first, I'll go first.
Okay, happy to. So what do you think has been the one thing that has made you successful here at George Mason University?
Well, one, I don't know if I'm really successful. No, I mean, that's funny. No, this sounds cheesy, but I think what's really made me successful is people, the overall people. And I can extend that to different stakeholders. So, for instance, when I say people made me successful, direct supervisors, and this is not brown-nosing, but like Tracy Watson and Matt Myers, as my real supervisors, just looking out for me, giving me guidance. We all know studies have shown that the relationship with your direct supervisor really indicates your satisfaction. And I've been blessed, knock on wood, to have back-to-back supervisors that are positive to me. So that's number one, right, in my macro. And then I can macro for my other colleagues. The other stakeholder people is students. And I used to have a job where I saw students and employers, but now I only see employers. But still having a connection to students, regardless of my role, has made me successful. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. I'm the advisor for the NAACP and Iota Alpha chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So I still have a plug and a touch point to young student leaders, particularly black student leaders. And they call me like a mentor, but just the fact that I have these young people that kind of be my focus group on what's going on, keeping me in the know, just kind of let me know what things to think about, to advocate for, just to give me a perspective when we're doing stuff and I'm talking to employers. I'm thinking like the experiences of my students, like, is this a job they would want? Like, I kind of think about sometimes like, if you want me to sell a job and help you recruit at Mason, would this be something I would be excited to share with my NAACP students, right?
Right.
Like, no, this is kind of scammy. I'm not going to do that, right? And
Right.
so just having that connection to students has made me successful. And then I'll say at large, the Mason community of just interacting with every single person, as I told you earlier, has made me successful because it's just I know where to go for help. Like, meaning like I know a person for that. I know a person for that. Oh, where do I get this? Oh, and if I don't know, I do my investigation, and then I know the answer, and then I keep that in my head. And so I think those three stakeholders have made me successful as people, but the different types of people, my direct colleagues, the students, and then just all different people around campus.
What a great answer.
Yeah. So if you could get rid of one technology for a year to force people to interact, which one would it be?
Wow.
And I'm thinking, I'm thinking like, like just for a year, people are gonna freak out. It's kind of like COVID, but it's the opposite. Like, because we when COVID happened, we got in person taken away, right?
Right.
And then you saw when we got in person taken away, techniques boomed.
Right.
Zoom. We had Zoom before.
Right.
We've been had Zoom.
Right.
But no one was using it like that, right? Now everyone's doing video calls. So
Right.
let's do the inverse, like kind of like a dystopian, apocalyptic future where technology is taken away.
Yeah.
we're forced to do stuff. What technology would you take away?
So the technology that I would take away would be email.
That's
And I'm going to tell you why.
That's it, yeah.
I think email is a crutch, right? So I think sometimes, and I do this, right? I think, it's infinitely faster and easier to send an email than to pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody. Or infinitely faster to send an email than to walk over to their office face-to-face, have a meeting, talk about it. But what I think is lost in email, first of all, like it's really hard to assess tone, right? It's really hard to really understand how someone feels because it's really easy to say things in a way that may come across as terse when it's really not intended that way. But also there's no exchange of ideas, right? It's just a simple like, hey, Philip, let's schedule the podcast for this time. What are we talking about, right? And what I'm not relaying to him is I might have other questions, I might have concerns that if we were face-to-face, I would certainly bring up. So I think, getting rid of that technology is really a good way to encourage more face-to-face interaction, to encourage beyond that deeper conversation, right? And those deeper conversations are going to help build that trust, that credibility, establish those relationships, and that's going to lead to better outcomes.
I was thinking while you were talking, I was thinking like a social experiment is like, what if like this university's email system, just the email, crashed for a week, just only 1 week,
right?
How much would we still get done? And like, mind you, we still had the phone system still working. We had maybe Teams still working because people still kind of use text, but email was crashed.
Right.
I wonder how many people would lose their minds.
What would be interesting would be to see how quickly people adapt.
Yeah, because adaptation, that's what we did with COVID. Like, I think, from my thought, like President Washington came, COVID was like late February, March, shut down the world. And then I just remember we literally had to pivot over that summer and start the fall semester hybrid-ish.
Right.
Right. Like, because we went through the no, actually, take that back. We pivoted on the moment and did the second half of
after
the
spring break. Right.
All on Blackboard Collaborate.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah.
They had, I don't know, shout out to IT. They had like a week to figure that out.
Right.
And so I think I wonder how quickly, like I said, I wonder how quickly we would adjust back. We adjust like when in person was taken away, we adjust very quickly to this technology. But I wonder how quickly we would adjust inversely if technology was taken away from us.
I think the quickest adjustment would be, it's like the expression, all politics are local, right? So the quickest adjustment would be within your immediate local area. So think about this for a minute. Like there are several offices here. How many times do we email each other, right? We're all here. We're all in the office. We're emailing each other. That would be the first thing that would go. So instead of emailing each other, we would walk over to the other office and say, hey, I have something I want to run by you, right? And then what you see next is I'd be going across the way to the building across the way, or I'd be walking over to Merton Hall, or walking over to somebody's office. And then I am confident we would find ways to quickly adjust.
Yeah. Also, I'm a nerd, and I think about zombie apocalypses all the time, and no technology, and you got to figure it out. And I was like, man, it's gonna be really hard. But I think to your point, like they hunker down and stay safe in their own little bubble during this time of no technology, and then hopefully connect with other people.
Yeah.
This has been a great podcast. Well, this is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. It means you get to shout out anyone you want to shout out to, show love to, and then plugs. These are things that I'll put in the show notes that listeners should just be aware of, whether it's things in your personal life, Costello business, anything that you want me to put in the show notes to elevate. So shout outs and plugs.
Yeah, so let me start with the shout outs. I want to give a shout out to Philip for giving me this opportunity. This came about, as he mentioned, because we were at the Sip Sip Club meeting. And he just said to me, hey, I want to do a podcast with you. I'm like, oh, great. I've never done one before. So really excited and appreciative for the opportunity. I also want to give a shout out to the students that I've been working with in the Costello College of Business in the last semester. They've taught me way more than they'll ever know, and it's been a pleasure. I want to give a shout out to my coworkers, to my bosses, to our dean, Ajay Vinze, for his leadership, to Patrick Soleimani, for his vision and leadership. and our faculty, because I think we are very much a team. We're a family. You'll see in Enterprise there are pictures going up of the family portrait, if you will, which is our entire faculty and staff. Yeah. So that's the kind of place that we work at. What I'll tell people, too, is the Costello College of Business is really an exciting place to be. I came here because I saw this enormous potential for growth, and I'm really happy to be a part of that. And I think it's something that you can see. It's very palpable. You can see it on our website. You can see it when you talk to our students, our faculty. Just everyone's excited to be here, and we're growing. So if you want to learn more about the business school, please feel free to go onto our website, business.gmu.edu. Thank you for your time and for the privilege of being on this podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. And so, Positive Philter listeners, as you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all his work fighting food insecurity. Also, if you're part of the Mason Nation, please consider submitting at Pats for Patriots to show love to anyone else in the Mason community. This has been a great episode. Thank you for listening, and have a great day. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity Movement. Thanks for listening.